Hi friends, here we are again with another growing season coming up, and it's time to get your seeds together and plan out how and when you're going to get each of them started. And for that, most of the information you need is usually on the back of the seed packs. But when you're reading through them, there's one phrase that always comes up that seems pretty confusing, especially if you're new to gardening. And that's as soon as the ground can be worked, or as soon as the soil is workable. But what does that really mean? I get a lot of questions on this, so in today's video, we'll go into the garden and I'll show you what to look for so you'll know exactly what that phrase means. Most of the instructions you read on the seed packets are all in reference to your last frost date, like the spinach telling you to plant outside after that date, or starting your tomato transplants 6 to 8 weeks before. It's the average date for the last spring frost that you're likely to get, and it varies depending on where you live in the country. You can easily look up on the internet to find out what your date is, but once you know it, it's something you can relate to and you can plan around every year. On the other hand, for all those seeds that you can plant when the ground is workable, that sounds kind of vague and not very clear at all, and depending on the weather, it will be different every growing season. It's not based on any specific time or a particular temperature. No, it's really all about the amount of moisture that's in the soil. And we can get a good read on that by doing a simple squeeze test. Just scoop up a small amount in one hand and try to press it firmly into a ball. Then we watch and see how the soil reacts. And this will let you know if you can plant those seeds now or maybe wait for the soil to dry out a bit more. Now, I've got a creek behind my property, and the ground slopes down a few feet from my house to the end of the garden. When the snow melts or when it rains, all that water slowly works its way through the ground towards the creek. So I'm always faced with different parts of the garden showing different levels of moisture. And this is a perfect way to show you all the different results you can get. Let's start somewhere in the middle. Like I said, just take a handful of soil and squeeze it tightly. And don't go too deep. You're just planting seed, so we just have to test the top inch or so. First, as you're squeezing, you want to see if any water is dripping from the clump. If so, that would mean that the soil is just too wet, and we could stop now and not test it any further. You'd have to give it some time to dry out and maybe make another test in a week or so. But there's no excess here, and the clump is also holding its shape. That's a good sign. If the soil were to just fall apart, it's because it's not wet enough, and that's usually not the issue at this time of year. Now, with your sample still compressed, we want to try poking or pushing into it gently. If it breaks apart easily and crumbles, then it's ready for planting. Here, though, it's not quite doing that. I'm pressing into it, but I'm just making some dents and some holes. It's acting more like a putty. So this means that there's just a bit too much moisture in this part of the bed. We should wait a few more days and then come back and try this spot again. Now, if I move more towards the house and uphill a little bit, this soil should be a little drier here. We'll do the very same test. Even with less moisture, after compressing it, it still holds its shape. It's not as sticky as the last test was, but when I tap or push into it now, this time it does break apart and easily crumbles in my hand. This is what we're looking for. This is what workable soil looks and feels like, and I could plant those seeds here now. The level of moisture in this bed not only helps hold the soil particles together for a good consistency, but there's also enough water here for what your seeds need to germinate with. Well, let's go further and see what the soil right up against the house is like. I usually just plant flowers here to decorate it, and right now it's looking pretty dry. Much of the moisture is drained away, but that's not the only reason why. The foundation of the house and all those bricks, they're absorbing energy from the sun all day long and transfer that heat into the soil, and that's causing a lot more evaporation to occur here. If I try squeezing this, it mostly falls apart without holding its shape at all. This is also workable soil, and you can plant it, but since this is so dry, I would make sure to give it a good watering first. If you don't, then the seeds will probably need more time to germinate. For best results, you'll always want to keep the soil moist enough to clump, but still be at that crumbly stage. And just to be complete, let's go down to the other end of the garden close to the creek and see what that's like. You have to expect more moisture in that soil as everything's been draining downhill. And sure enough, this area is pretty mucky. It's totally saturated. Pushing into it, it's so wet. All I have here is just a lot of mud. And of course, if I try testing it, there's no chance of any clumping. It's so loose, it just oozes through your fingers. You can't plant here. Not yet. This is weeks away from being ready. The reason why being workable is important is that although all the particles in the soil may be damp, there are still gaps between them. Those spaces allow the ground to hold a lot of air, and that's very important. You may not be aware, but seeds need oxygen to germinate. And it's not just the seeds, the roots depend on the oxygen to grow as well. If there's too much water filling those gaps, then that could slow their growth, and planting in this muck, that'll probably lead to your seeds drowning and just rotting on you. This is one of the reasons why you don't want to walk too much on your soil, especially when it's wet. It'll compress the layers and squeeze out a lot of that air, damaging the soil structure, and it'll need time to recover. And one last point. I don't use raised beds, but if you do, you can test your soil in the same way. Typically, since they drain faster and warm up quicker than the lower ground around them, you'll find that they can be workable a little earlier. So this has been a good quick tip to pass along, and I hope it helps you in your garden. Thanks for watching, and see you next time here on Garden Well, Eat Well.